comes to you on Wednesdays or Sundays, this being at 4 o'clock. This being Wednesday, here we are now. One of the little minor problems is Councilor Curtis is out of town, so I have to do this one kind of by myself. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but we can have some fun with it anyway. And we can talk a little bit about the news of the day. So to start off with a couple of things. One, I'd let you know that I'm missing some of my Apple II Geek Fest in Kansas City, or actually a little bit different from Kansas City, but the Apple II people from, well, a lot of them actually are from the 80s and 90s. I started with an Apple II in the late 70s, and so I'm missing that in Kansas. Probably not missing much because I understand that it's about 120 degrees out there or something. And also I've been binging, usually everybody wants to know what I've been binging on recently, and the latest binge is The Closer, which I find kind of interesting. I saw it when it first came on, but at least now you can see it without the ads. And I haven't listened yet to either Ben Shapiro or Scott Adams on the latest news of the day, but I will say this, that if you don't listen normally to Scott Adams, you should. He has probably one of the best takes on how the Donald is doing, and it's most especially, of course, was the hyperbolic response to the mainstream press across the board of the horrific thing that Donald apparently was in the pocket of Putin, and nothing could be further from the case from the truth. So we might talk about that a little bit later on. Now, I just in no particular order. Let me go down the list here and on some stuff that I picked up for today. One, why do people with disabilities want bans on plastic straws to be more flexible? Of course, one of the reasons there is a ban on plastic, this actually occurred to me just the other day when I had to ask for a straw, and of course, when it came, it was plastic. And I asked her why, and she said, well, we've decided you have to ask for it. That's all it is. And of course, it reminds me a little bit in Europe, you have to ask for ice. Americans always just get ice anyway. But still, the plastic straw ban is kind of interesting. It started with what I call the little girl in the mine shaft type of story, and that is when they found a sea turtle with a straw stuffed up his nose. Now, interestingly enough, they pulled the straw out and the turtle went away. But this led right away to say, well, there's jillions of straws in the ocean, and this plastic has got to stop, and we got to save the turtles. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that I would imagine that the amount of plastic in the ocean is dwarfed by this plastic straw plastic in the ocean is probably dwarfed by the other plastics that are in. And most notably, I think we talked about this, Curtis and I talked about this on last Sunday, and that the oceans are all over with plastic. So, and even to the extent that in Starbucks they decided to ban plastic straws for the coffee, and they've replaced it with a plastic sippy top that actually has more plastic in it. So once again, we see the ludicrousness of some of this stuff. Okay, next, I thought this was kind of interesting. On July 27th, 2016, Donald Trump mounted a podium in Doral, Florida, and issued a plea to Russia. If you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. Well, what's fascinating about this is on its face, this was a joke. There's no question this was a joke, but the mainstream press, of course, took this up as colluding, and Trump was referring to the emails Hillary Clinton had deleted as relevant to her work at the State Department. That is to say, he was asking straightforwardly and publicly for Russian agents to break into Clinton's computer and steal documents that she had deleted and release them to the public. Apparently, the Russians heard, because according to the indictment special counsel Robert Mueller revealed Friday that on the same day in 2016, Russian hackers attempted for the first time to hack into email accounts at a domain hosted by a third-party provider that used Clinton's personal office. They also targeted 76 email addresses at the domain of the Clinton campaign. To be clear, Russia's campaign to interfere with the election was ongoing by 2016, and what Trump's request seemed to have done was to focus their efforts on Clinton's emails. Well, of course, this shows you when you really don't like somebody, it's what's interesting to me is to see how what is obviously a joke, and they take it and they use it as they did, of course, before. They use it as reasons to issue indictments. It's sort of the same thing that they did with in using the dossier to go and get a FISA warrant on some of the I forget what it was, FISA warrant, I think on. I forget who it was. Doesn't matter. Mandelbrot or whatever his name is. Mandelbrot. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the deal is, what's funny about this is that, of course, the way they got the FISA warrant was not to let everything, not let the judge know, and the judge wasn't apparently savvy enough to ask the question. But they didn't let him know where they'd gotten the information from, and the judge, if they'd known that, the judge might have. Although the FISA court has been a rubber stamp, so maybe they still would have gotten it. I don't know. So that ends that. Next item, which I thought, again, these are in no particular order. So I just want to go ahead and make sure that we have an actual Jimmy Doane 4 o'clock Wednesday. And I think that Councilor Curtis is supposed to be back tomorrow. He's actually I believe he's up in Atlanta, getting ready to appear on some movie or TV show. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but he should be back, and we might even have a sum up show of what he has been doing tomorrow at 4 o'clock here on the Jimmy Doane channel. Anyway, in New York, the hammering and drilling began just months after Jared Kushner's family real estate firm bought a converted warehouse apartment in the hip Wilmington section of Brooklyn. Tenants say that it started early in the morning and went on until nightfall, and it was so loud that it drowned out the normal conversation, and so violent that it rattled pictures off the walls. So much dust wafted through the ducts and under doorways that it coated beds and clothes and closets. Rats crawled through holes in the walls. Workers with pass keys barged in unannounced. Residents who begged for relief got the standard reply, "We have permits." And of course, that's, More than a dozen current and former residents of the building told Associated Press that they believe that the Kushner company's relentless construction, along with rent hikes of $500 more, were part of a campaign to push tenants out of listen to this, rent-stabilized apartments and bring on high-paying condo buyers. Now, what's interesting, of course, you can probably Google this, but rent controls or rent stabilization programs always invariably backfire. This is one of those things that I know that I've heard this for years. One of the things that people do in New York is to peruse the death notices of people and find out if they lived in a rent controlled apartment and dash over there before anybody else can get there and try and get in on the deal so they can get a rent-controlled apartment. Apparently, when the guy dies, if it stays in, I don't know exactly how it works, but apparently you can run over there and get yourself into a below-market rent-controlled apartment. And this is the kind of thing that happens. It reminds me a little bit of when people go stand in line to get something, at a huge sale, and they're willing to spend hours doing it or spend all day, perusing the death notices and so forth in order to see if they can get a good deal. Whereas, of course, what happens with rent-controlled apartments very often is that they depreciate, rather, or they don't get fixed up. It's not worth the landlord to fix them up. So what they do is very often they convert them to condos. And one of the things that is interesting, it's been a remarkably successful, this particular one has been a remarkably successful campaign. An AP investigation found that over the past 3 years, more than 250 rent stabilized or rent controlled, whatever you want to call it, 75% of the building were either emptied or sold as the Kushner company was converting the building into luxury condos. Well, of course, you're an idiot if you don't do that. This is one of the things that happens all the time is you convert something that's not economically viable or not worth something. And when you do a conversion, obviously the price goes up. They do it because they're going to make a profit. And the average now is $1.2 million per apartment. I don't know what the rents are, but I can tell you, if you try and rent a $1.2 million apartment out, what you have to get is something that's pretty high, and probably pays you to actually go and buy it. And of course, people are buying these things. and again, what I want to tell you, basic, having been in real estate previously, I can tell you that one of the basic tenets in real estate, tenets, I like that, is that when you do a conversion of any kind, when you convert, raw land into a parking lot, you have upped the value. When you convert a parking lot into an apartment complex, that's good. And you can see from time to time when places are being look like perfectly good places are being torn down to make room for another place. I mean, they do. I remember when years ago on the beach in St. Petersburg, they were tearing down motels to put up apartments. And the motel was a perfectly good moneymaker, but because they were more valuable as condos, they had a little bubble at the time. So the point being that rent control never works, and so you need to stay away from that. Okay, now the next thing that we have here on the list is Chief Justice Roberts. This is done from the standpoint of what the lefties think about voting, and they talk about voting rights. And it's interesting because when you talk about a right, it's something that everybody has. Well, there are a lot of people that can't vote. I mean, if you're not a citizen, or if you're in a lot of places, if you're a convicted felon. I mean, so it's not a right per se to everybody. But Chief Justice Roberts has a plan to neuter the Voting Rights Act, all of it. He held on to this plan for nearly 40 years, waiting for the day when he could deploy it. Well, that day is nearly upon us. If the Senate confirms the Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, to replace the retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy, Roberts will almost certainly have the votes he needs to gut American, and this, of course, the code word, gut, the voting rights law. It's hard to tell. It's not hard to guess what will happen next. And Chief Justice Roberts said there isn't enough racism in America to justify the Voting Rights Act. Consider Alabama, the former home of George Wallace, had a strict voter ID law requiring voters to show ID in order to cast a ballot. In 2015, the state attempted to close down DMV offices in predominantly black counties, effectively keeping many black voters from attaining the ID they needed to vote, though the state largely backed down due to a federal probe. So it was a nothing burger, basically, is what it boiled down to. Now, one of the things that I think is fascinating about this, and I've always felt this, because as a guy who grew up when literally what you had to do was there was these big machines that were at the elementary school where I was up in Bethesda, and they had these levers on them, and on the voting on Tuesday, you had to go there and you had to pull the little levers along the names and then pull down this big handle, and that would register your vote. But it was all done on that Tuesday. There was no such thing as early voting, and there was no such thing as weekend or whatever it is. Now, you still could get, even back then, you could get an absentee ballot. Now, typically, you had to be actually absentee, I believe. They would want you couldn't just get an absentee ballot, I don't believe, if you lived within a couple of miles and weren't going to be out of town. If you lived within a couple of miles of the voting station and weren't going to be out of town. I don't know, I forget. But these days, anybody can get an absentee ballot, number one, virtually anybody. And the idea that sometime during the 360 days out of the year that there's no voting, and actually every other year, that is, if you can't go get an ID, that seems to me, I just don't quite understand that. If you should be able to get an ID sometime during that time, and otherwise you're not really trying hard enough. So anyway, when the Voting Rights Act dies, states will be free to emulate Alabama and to go much further. Polling places could be closed in predominantly black, neighborhoods. Sunday voting and other practices preferred by voters of color will be eliminated. Well, I doubt it. And gerrymandering will thrive. State lawmakers seeking to rig elections will grow more and more aggressive, and the Supreme Court will look the other way. Well, again, this is all hypothetical. And in this day and age, seriously, in this day and age, I don't care who you are. If you don't vote, it's because you really don't want to. And as somebody who, I'm with Scott Adams on this one, I guess I rarely, if ever, I almost never vote because of reasons that it really doesn't make any difference. And all you're doing when you do vote is you're saying that you accept the outcome. Well, most of the outcomes, especially here in Alachua County, I don't agree with. I mean, the people running the show in this county are screaming liberals, and they're the ones that saddled us with in their enviro freakishness. They put us with a biomass plant, which we have to pay for and can't use, and nobody got arrested, which I think they should have. So then that's one of the things that that you might want to, let me just see if I got everything. Yep. Okay. So I wouldn't worry about the Voting Rights Act being gutted. And again, if you can't, in most places, even they were screaming here, I think it was here in Florida, I'm not sure, that when the early voting was cut from like 7 days to 5 days, boy, you'd have thought nobody was going to be able to vote. It's insanity. And of course, at least almost always one of those days that you can early vote on is a Sunday. And, if you can't carpool your people, and they do actually here in town, they send buses around to pick up people in neighborhoods so they can go vote. So again, there's no way in my mind. I think this is a red herring, is what I'm saying. Okay, next item, and I think this is kind of interesting also. If I keep looking down here, I'm looking at the thing over here on my notes over here. Let me see if I can move these notes over here a little closer. Okay, one of the year's most surprising gadgets to appear at CES this year was a Kodak branded cryptocurrency mining computer. Now, for those of you who don't know this, when you sign up on, let's say, Bitcoin or one of the other cryptocurrencies, the way they work it, and I forget what it is on Bitcoin, but I think it's like 20 million Bitcoins or 40 million, I forget, whatever it is, Bitcoins are all that will be available ever. And when it started in 2010, when you signed up, you could be Bitcoin mining. This is back when they were worth a penny or less of Bitcoin, and you could actually mine Bitcoins, and every couple of hours you could get one. And because there weren't any high-powered machines that were just doing it. Well, what happened was some people figured out that if you put together a super high-powered gaming machine with advanced clocking and everything like that, advanced high clocking, cooling and everything, that you could mine them a lot faster. Well, one of the little minor problems you have with mining, with anything, the more you mine, the less there is, the harder it is to get the next ones. It's just like a regular old gold mine. You can open up the seam first, and then you have tailings and all that kind of stuff. But as gold gets more and more valuable, it takes more and more effort to get more gold out of the mine. And this is exactly the way the Bitcoins work. And the idea is that when they, I forget what it is, a couple of years from now, they'll figure that they've used up all the Bitcoins, and then that way the supply will supposedly be strictly limited, and the price could vary according to market. Anyway, it's what they said was this cryptocurrency computer might seem like an easy way to make money if you lease the machine, but economists have said the math never added up, and that actually is true to one extent. One of the problems you got, I think there were some people that went to Iceland or something like that to set up a high-powered Bitcoin mining machine in there, and I forget exactly. I think because the cooling was easy because it's cold, and the power was cheap because I forget how Iceland gets its power, but apparently it's fairly inexpensive. So they could set up these machines. And one of the problems you've got, of course, if you set up this machine that's drawing, thousands of watts per hour, in order to crank up the computing capabilities, your power bill starts to go through the ceiling. Your electricity or whatever, and at some point it doesn't become, if it costs you $5,000 to get, or $10,000 to get one Bitcoin. Well, today it wouldn't really be worth it. It might have been worth it when it was $20,000 per Bitcoin, but the price I think today is around $6,000. The point is that it's going to cost you in power to pay $10,000 worth of electricity to buy, get one Bitcoin. It's just not worth it. And even if you do it, you're never going to get a Bitcoin if you use your little dorky computer like this one, for instance. So anyway, these people have decided what they did is they did a feasibility test on this thing, and they planned to lease the Bitcoin-focused Kodak Cash miner, trademark KASH miner, and rigs dedicated to other cryptocurrencies for about $3,400 for 2 years, and it would give you half the currency of the machine generates while pocketing the rest. It's kind of a good deal, because first of all, they get the $3,400 up front. That's number one. I don't know. Of course, the machine probably costs more than that. But they get that up front, and then if they get half of anything that you might mine. Now, I believe when you mine these cryptocurrencies, you can mine like bits and pieces of them. I think you can, get, and at some point maybe you get 1/10 of a Bitcoin. So I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, it would give you half the currency. Spotlight said the computer is essentially a third-party device with a sticker slapped on the side, would generate a value of about $375 per month. Now you think about it, $375 per month, which today is like a 20th of a Bitcoin, or a total of $9,000 over 2 years, given an average Bitcoin price of 14,000. Yet that overlooks how Bitcoin fundamentally works, and that mining the coin, it becomes more difficult as we told with the gold mine, it becomes more and more difficult. And of course, if the price for some reason should the Bitcoin, as it did, it was up at around $20,000, and now it's around 6,000. So it's not impossible that the other cryptocurrencies might take hold. I mean, nobody ever knows. So you're on your own on that. Okay, let's see what the other next thing is. Okay, let me read you this headline. Amid questions about how conspiracy theorists' accounts are treated during today's House Judiciary Committee with Facebook, Google, and Twitter on social media filtering practices, Representative Steve King, R. Iowa, dropped a bombshell. What about converting the large behemoth organizations that we're talking about into public utilities? Now, this, of course, is one of the things that Congress always does. The telephone companies, as soon as they got large, they were converted into a public utility. The private bus system here, for instance, in Gainesville was run privately. The city bought it up, or the county city bought it up, and now it's a public utility. And what happens with the public utilities, of course, is they come up with all kinds of regulations, and they come up with essentially monopoly things. If they're going to regulate these utilities, it makes it very hard for anybody else to get in the business. I mean, if you wanted to start a private bus company here in town, or another cab company, or anything like that, you would be stymied by the regulations that you need. And this is what always happens. The representative, King, also suggested that there may be a need for a, quote, review of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act that protects interactive computer services from being treated as a publisher of content users post on their platforms. Now, here's the deal. If that rule is changed, social media companies could be held responsible for illegal content from copyright infringement or child pornography appearing on their platform. That would essentially cripple the social media industry, requiring extensive pre-vetting of any content they display. Interestingly enough, I mean, this is one of those things that, as it is right now, the social media giants, whatever you want to call them, do actually an overkill job of regulating the content. It's interesting, and it's sad. They overkill in that they now, as we've seen, like the IRS people, they seem to censor a lot of conservative folks on your tweets disappear, or your Facebook or your YouTube videos go into some protected area where it's very hard to reach them. Maybe this one will. I don't know. I doubt it, because we don't have any listeners yet. Anyway, that's fine. But the share prices, interestingly enough, the share prices of the tech giants did not see any significant change from this, which is kind of interesting, because guess what? I believe that they feel that they have enough power, and if there is regulation on them, that will mean no fresh competition will come in, and we'll be stuck with Facebook and Google and Twitter until hell freezes over. So what's interesting, of course, is when we see how the market for those products evolved over the years. I mean, there was Space-Time. I mean, there were other search engines before Google, I forget what it was before Twitter. But the point is that the social networking has evolved, and now, yes, they're giants. But this is not to say that in not too long a time that let me just see here. Can I turn this up? Hello. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I don't know what that is. Hello. No, okay. That says microphone. I wonder what that is. Nope, don't know. Okay. So let me just go ahead. That's the last thing I had to say. And I think that it's interesting that the tech giants are not worried about this. You would think they would be, but they have seen the history as it is, how as soon as there's regulation, on electricity or water or anything, government regulation that government enforces but amounts to a monopoly. I mean, here, for instance, in Gainesville, there's a monopoly on cable TV, Cox Cable, and you can't. They can charge whatever they want if you want to have their service. So anyway, that's about it for now. And just I want to remember, this is a Jimmy Doane show. You can leave when you watch this. You can leave us a comment on anything like that, and do a like or however that works. Not sure yet. And we'll be back. Curtis and I, Councilor Curtis and I, Jimmy Doane, will be back on Sunday with more news, and we'll have some additional news, and maybe Councilor Curtis will be able to tell us about his trip to Hotlanta, where, as I say, he's I think the movie he's going to be in or the TV show is the new MacGyver. I'm not sure exactly. So at any rate, I'm going to sign off for now. Have a great day, and please tune in when you can on Sunday.